This is my very informal book review where I like to say one very key point or important thing I learned. This book is about women's suffrage from 1860 to 1920. Why did women's suffrage take so long? One of the biggest reasons, business interest and alcohol. This book goes into explicit detail about how there was a visible enemy that was constantly thwarting the suffrage movement's agenda, and how it took quite a bit of time for them to discover who it was because they were so well hidden. Often they didn't take notes, there were no minutes, there was scarcely any record of what they were discussing, and they didn't loudly advertise, and they weren't just required to discuss what they were doing by law. It took ages for the suffrage movement to even find actual evidence of the conspiracy's existence, and even that was incomplete due to the efforts that this cartel made to stay hidden. Again, they had literal cartels hiding in the shadows that worked together to raise funds to assault suffrage movements on a state and national level. They would speak to businesses that benefited from alcohol, and they would convince them to recruit people to vote against suffrage. They would press politicians who were for suffrage. They would vow to use considerable power to basically politically destroy these people who voted against the alcohol companies. And argument often went like this. Hi, bar owner and guy who owns a business selling bar supplies. Do you like having a business? Well, if the women get the right to vote, they're going to pass prohibition laws, so you'll lose your business. But we can give you resources to go out and recruit like 100 guys to help vote against their vote. The book mentions someone that the suffrage movement knew was an ally. He was a key politician. Approached them with tears in his eyes, explaining that if he dared to vote for suffrage, his political career and his business would be destroyed. He was a lawyer, I believe. And this wasn't like just, a concern. This was an ironclad promise. They had the means to make this happen. But yeah, through a considerable portion of the book, there was an invisible enemy who seemed to change the fortune of the campaign in the oddest ways, and they could not figure out why until after a few failures. It was all alcohol and corporate interests. The reason why was basically unrelated to the suffrage movement itself. Essentially, the business types got the idea that the suffragists were staunchly in favor of prohibition, which the book purports to basically be incorrect. It was a lesser issue or a non-issue in their eyes. They were mostly focused on women's suffrage. The alcohol thing was an entirely separate thing. Or, to put it another way, the suffrage movement didn't have any particular considerations or alliances with the prohibition movement as far as the book notes, and it says the opposite. However, the mere possibility of giving women the right to vote was treated as a guarantee for the victory of the Drive movement. The Drive movement is basically the prohibition movement. So the anti-prohibition was basically a certainty that women's suffrage would lead to prohibition writ large, so they did anything they could to stop it. Tampering of votes, buying votes, recruiting new immigrants who didn't understand the finer points of the policy, but they can be, directed, etc., etc. So a huge portion of why women's suffrage was delayed as much as it was due to, alcohol and business interests.